Hi, my name is Bryan Lue, and today I'd like to talk about the Refrain Errata. Just last week, Forcible released an official announcement stating that they will errata Reflect Refrain. If you have not seen the announcement yet, here's a link to the announcement in the description below. Anyways, I've been meaning to write an article about this change, but I've been having a difficult time putting the words on the paper, so I figured it'd be better if I tried to do this in a video format to see if it works better for me. Before we begin, I'd like to apologize if I cough or whatever in this video. I have a bit of a slight cold. Anyways, the basic change to Reflect Refrain is that all of the abilities on the front side can only be used on the turn player's turn. So you can no longer use Reflect's abilities on your opponent's turn, and this will be effective uh, after February 1st, after AGP Richmond and AGP Pasadena. While that seems to be a pretty fair nerf to a very powerful ruler, I like to break down and analyze what sort of specific changes to the meta and the game as a whole that we might see during the AGP season. Some of these changes are good, some of these aren't so good. Just keep in mind that many of these points are speculative and simply predictions of possible changes in the future. Alright, so, maybe wrong, maybe right. Here's your disclaimer. Alright, so let's go ahead and get right into it. Alright, so number one, Reflect will still probably be the best ruler. So the reason, okay, so let me go ahead and try and back this up. All right, so first you have to kind of look at Reflect from a more objective view, or just like let's try and evaluate Reflect for one. All right, so the reason why I think Reflect is such a very powerful card is that it's incredibly dynamic, right? This is usually not a metric that a lot of people use in terms of evaluating cards. I know that in Yu-Gi-Oh and in Magic and in Hearthstone, this sort of thing isn't something that you really think about when you're trying to evaluate cards. A lot of times you look at raw stats. Does it give you card advantage? But if any of you are Magic players, I would highly recommend you read the article Jace is Busted, Evaluating Dynamic Cards. It's by AJ Socher, and it's on newmontgaming.com. Go ahead and check it out. If you have not read it, however, he really talks about how they missed the mark on this card called Jace, Bryn's Prodigy, and how just as the community as a whole just didn't get how powerful it was until it actually just straight up dominated the whole entire standard format. And a lot of this can be applied here. In his article, he talks about how dynamic the card is and how strategically strong it is, and how the whole entire kit, as even though the individual abilities weren't very strong, the whole entire kit as a whole sort of like meshed together and put you on this game plan as a whole. And I think something very similar is happening with Reflect here. Um, you have a whole range of abilities. So you have 6 abilities, 3 on the front, 3 on the back, right? You can use all of these abilities, and not just once per turn, but once on your turn and once on your opponent's turn. Even with the change, once on your turn, that's still a lot of times you can make this decision. +2/+2, draw one, put one away, or untap, right? It's just a lot of things that you can do, and it's all completely costless. So being able to make those sort of decisions is very powerful because of the way having a wide decision tree works. Basically, if the more options you have, right, the more that a stronger player or a more skilled player can take the right route more often and build up small advantages from those tiny decisions and basically snowball it into a win, right? Um, if you have a smaller decision tree, then you have a whole bunch of decisions that are, well, not a whole bunch of them, but a couple of decisions that are very impactful if you choose the right one and if you choose the wrong one, right? So, like, even though, for example, let's just say that there is a ruler that gives you the option of 5 different options: A, B, C, D, and E, right? Whereas another ruler only gives you 3, right? Even though the majority of the time for both the first ruler and the second ruler, A is the most powerful one, you still have the option to choose D and E. Whereas in the first ruler, you can only choose A, B, and C. Just having the option to choose the best route is what gives it something just what gives it power, really. It's not a very easy concept to understand, but it's just like having the flexibility of plays is something that is not really talked about in uh, not just Forcible but most Magic communities. So again, please, if you are a Magic player, or even if you're not a Magic player, read the article, because it's really it hits the head on how we should be approaching Reflect Refrain and how we should evaluate these sort of cards. All right. So I was talking a little bit earlier about like dynamics. So I covered a little bit about like dynamic strength. So I kind of want to talk about strategic strength. All right. I said a little bit of this beforehand, but strategic strength is basically where all your things are on this sort of game plan. All right. So in Reflect, your game plan, like the thing that it's focusing towards is not losing and winning. All right, to boil it down very simply. But what I mean by that is it's about improving your consistency while having a lot of tempo and putting your opponent very behind and putting yourself very ahead. And if you're ahead, you basically shut them out of the game. If you're behind, you can claw back from a losing position to a winning position, and eventually turn that winning position to a win, right? So so the +2/+2 ability allows you to, instead of being at parity in trading or being behind, you can uh, you can eat something if you're trading, and you can trade with something if you're behind. So, like for example, your 4/4s now can trade for their 6/6s, and your 6/6s don't just trade with their sixes anymore. They actually eat their 6/6s, right? So reflect gives you that sort of edge where no other ruler gives you that sort of edge, especially on its front side. So we also have to consider that many of these rulers on their front side don't actually do anything, whereas Reflect is the only ruler that can actually do multiple things and have multiple decisions on its front side. The closest thing that we have is to Grim. Is Grim, and Grim you get to toss one and search for a a fairy tale resonator. Sorry, resonator. And it's a very powerful ability. However, that's the only thing that it can do. Whereas Reflect can do, draw one, put one away, you can +2/+2, and you can untap just on the front side. So that in itself um, is very like so much more powerful than any other ruler. All the other rulers you have to J activate it for them to actually get some sort of value. Um, all right. So there's dynamic strength and strategic strength. You have the range, like sort of like the being able to open up a whole bunch of options and being able to have this sort of game plan, right? So when we have the reflect refrain nerf, right, we basically cut down how strong each of these sort of strengths are, but don't actually impact kind of the core of these strengths. So you don't lose any of its dynamic range, meaning that you don't lose out on the range of decisions that you can do. For example, you still can draw one, put one away. You still can +2/+2. You can still do all the abilities that Reflect Refrain has, but you can't do them as often. But you still have the range of abilities, and you still can decide from that range. So it didn't lose any of its its core strength, which is its dynamic range. Um, the dynamic strength is important. I'll go ahead and talk about why that how that's impacted later on. But there is that. because you have a drop in consistency because you can't draw and put away as much. So I sort of predict that decks that require you to have this sort of consistency, saying like Incarnate or Digital Underground or Alice's World to some extent, are all decks that really need to use that draw one put on one ability to make the deck extremely cohesive. Otherwise, you have just like a whole bunch of clunky parts, and if you don't get what you want, you're just like basically really screwed. So you really have to adapt to be more consistent. Whereas the other decks are trying to be as consistent as possible already, so there's not really much to change. So you can't. So I would, coming into this next format, I would highly recommend not playing something that requires a whole bunch of clunkiness or jankiness. So basically, so out of the 40 cards in the deck, I would say 25 of them you'd like to open it up independently, and maybe 15 of them you wouldn't want to open by themselves, and like you want to pair them with something else, or you don't want to see multiple copies of. So you just have to, when you're approaching it from a deck building perspective, you just have to be more considerate of consistency as a concept. All right, let's go ahead and go into the third point. All right, so reflect counters are much more valuable. So obviously, being able to use it once per turn cuts down the number of counters that you can put on it. So you like the days of being able to ramp up your reflect to 16 counters or whatever. Those days are basically gone unless you're using familiar or whatever. All right, but these changes, this change sort of impacts certain cards. Like for example, Change the World gets much better because since reflect counters are much more valuable, you still want to have use the whole entire dynamic range of reflexibility, which includes -4ing to try and search for a card. And in order to get to the point where you can use all of these options and do whatever, you need to have counters on reflect. And this is where Change the World comes in. So basically, if you're familiar with the reflect mirror match, it doesn't matter what it is. I mean, some of them play out very similarly. Like for example, like reflex Cthulhu's will play out very similar to Alice's World. I think Alice's World is better, of course, but that's neither here nor there. But basically, what ends up happening is you play this sort of grind game where you're trying to gain this sort of change the world advantage, where if you have more change the world than your opponent, you'll basically win. There are other factors involved, but that's one of the main ways that you can advance your game state to win, is if you have more counters and you have more change the world. So that's something that you have to keep in mind. So post nerf, right? Change the World gets significantly better because reflect counters are just so much more valuable because you don't get as many anymore. You can't just go, oh, whoops, I don't have a Change the World. I can't get as many counters. I guess I can make do with what I have right now. You can't really do that anymore. So Change the World gets much stronger, and with Change the World, Regalia hate becomes a lot stronger as well. For example, Barrier of Shadows, Maribel, Hera, all of these get much better because Change the World gets better as well. So these are cards to keep in mind with this sort of change. All right, let's go on and go to the next one. So Gherta gets a bit worse. So I'll go ahead and get more into this later on. But for now, Gherta gets worse because since your counters are worth more, right? So then taking counters off of Reflect and not using reflex abilities gets significantly worse. It means that the Gherta as a whole costs more to use her range of abilities, and it's just not as good. However, I'd argue that Gherta does get better, and I'll go ahead and get into that a little later. Another thing with the Reflect change is Refrain as a J ruler gets worse. In terms of being able to use all of her abilities. Like Refrain is already a very counter-hungry sort of J ruler, and reducing the number of counters that you get reduces how many decisions that you can make with it. It just makes it a lot harder to use its -4 ability because you never like in the mirror match you never want to dip really really low on counters. If you're playing not against the mirror match, you're probably winning anyways because you reflect refrain. All right. Let's go ahead and go into our fourth point, which is Alice's world gets weaker with less card filtering. All right. So for sure, Alice's world gets significantly weaker, right? With less card filtering, you do get less Morgiana triggers. You get less consistency. You can't play a clunkier deck, and your high impact cards you just won't see as much, right? So you can't. It's much more difficult to go. Adam Brawler, Guiber, off of turn one elf, Morgiana Cat, into a whole bunch of bullshit, right? It's just the nut draws are less likely to happen, and you have a lot more consistency issues. Um, that being said, I still think that Alice's World it's a very good deck. Still going into the next format, but it's significantly worse. It probably drops down by a significant margin in comparison to the rest of the other decks. And I wanted to mention this is because it kind of covers certain cards like for example, Morgiana gets significantly worse. Um, Elf gets significantly worse because you don't have the option to do the Feasting trip and untap it at the end of turn. Some versions of Alice's World play Feasting, so you can't use the Feasting trick anymore. You just don't have the option to turbo out a Feasting. You also can't play really janky cards like I don't know, Law of Silence that are very high impact, but they are pretty selective in their use. So your decks are the deck in itself is just much more clunkier, and it loses a lot of power. It's hard to say whether or not it will still be the best deck coming into the next format, and it's hard to say how much worse Alice's World gets, but it's just one deck that gets significantly weaker coming into the next format. All right, so the fifth point is combat will now favor the turn player. All right, so combat. So the way this works is this is mostly touching on the +2/+2 ability of Reflect and only being able to use it on your turn, right? So if we're going into this meta, assuming that Reflect and Refrain is still the best ruler, right? Combat will favor the person whose turn it is because you can swing into something and get +2/+2, and your opponent can't give it +2/+2, right? So things that will make combat be in your favor during your turn is much better. So what I'm talking about is stuff like swiftness and target attack, and I guess to a certain extent, I suppose. No, first strike is a very bad example. Let's just say swiftness and target attack. All right. So what swiftness does is basically cut down the amount of turns it takes for your resonator to have to attack because it doesn't have summoning sickness. For example, if your opponent's thing is tapped, right? So let's say they have a tapped Hera or something like that, right? You just play a Lancelot, right, and swing into it, and they can't pump back because so you don't have to trade pumps anymore. This way, you can just run it over. Actually, I suppose Hera is a bad example. Let's just say they have a Lancelot, right? And you have a Lancelot, right, in your hand. You play your Lancelot, you attack into the Lancelot. You can pump once, and they can't pump back, right? So then you're just way far ahead because they just lost to Lancelot, right? And you didn't have to wait a turn with, just a normal 6/6 because Lancelot has swiftness. So basically, swiftness cuts down on a turn, right? So it puts you far ahead. Whereas target attack does sort of similar thing, except for once you play the target attack thing, you don't have to wait for your opponent to attack with their guy before you can attack them back. You can just attack into it directly. So these are sort of basically like tempo modifiers to combat. And so the reason I want to talk about this is because this affects Gherta a lot. So Gherta actually becomes insanely good because it's the only creature that has swiftness and target attack. So see, there's the coffin, All right. It's the only creature, only resonator that can have swiftness and target attack. even though it eats up more counters that are more valuable, it gets stronger because swiftness and target attack become more stronger because combat is just much better on your turn, right? So you can, for example, if they have a like a Morgiana that you have to kill, right? Um, this way you don't have to wait for the Morgiana to ever swing, and you don't have to wait for and you don't have to wait an additional turn for summoning sickness to go away. So uh, it's just kind of shows how much more powerful these mechanics are uh, with this new change. All right. So sixth point. So this is more from a tournament perspective. All right. So matches end faster, less time is taken, there are less draws, and therefore there are less controversies. Right. So in this game, there's already a lot of controversies that have happened, but we're not going to get to that right now. This change of less cards being drawn and put away, less decisions being made, means that matches no longer like will have they'll have a less higher likelihood of going into time. Force of Will is already a pretty complicated game, and like even in something like a Bahamut format, a lot of people were going into time. So a lot of that was just people not knowing how to play their decks, people not getting the practice in, whatever. But basically, with this change, you don't because there's a lot less. It cuts down basically half of the number of interactions based on Reflect Refrain alone. It makes the turns less complicated. It means that the whole entire tournament goes smoother as a whole too. Um, and I think this is a very good change because already in Forcible we don't have very much time. 50 minutes is not a lot for how complex these games can get and how long these games can get. And it's definitely a step in the right direction from a tournament perspective because it's just a very complex. Reflect Refrain is a very complex card to play with. So in that end, I think this is a very good change that matches in faster. Um, it means that it doesn't punish the player for trying to make the best, like take the time to make the best decision, and instead rewards you for playing better as opposed to trying to race the clock. All right, number 7. The errata shows that the company cares about the health of the game, more in particular the meta game. Um, yeah, I think that this is actually a pretty good change. It means that yes, the company is watching out for unhealthy formats. So we probably won't see something like Baja format again. Where you have a one deck format, and only one thing can be good. Uh, while I don't actually know if this change will have the intended effect of creating more diversity in the format in terms of J rulers, it might increase the diversity of the format in terms of different sorts of decks. You might just have, what we have now, which is like 5 different reflect decks, which do very, very different things, but they still use the same J ruler. It's very, very difficult to define what constitutes a deck, or like a sort of deck in this sort of games because all the really powerful cards are just up there, and you kind of want to play them all anyways. So like a lot of decks will share the same core even if they're doing significantly different things. All right, so well, anyways, this shows that the company like does care about the game, and it's not like Konami where it's like, oh, we don't care if you have a one deck format in Necros or whatever. Okay, so number 8, it sets the precedent for future errata. So this kind of ties into the last point, in that because the company has shown that they care about the health of the game. They show that they're willing to make a change whenever that there is something wrong with the format. That being said, this allows for people to sort of cry out and say, hey, we want this change whenever they're not happy with the format. And you might get like brigades trying to call for additional erratas if they're really unhappy with some sort of format. This is sort of good and sort of bad. Um it's sort of touchy to say, but all in all, I think this is pretty good because it means that if there's something wrong, we know that there is a possible fix. But if people perceive there to be something wrong, and it might not be as bad as people think, and the company is not making this sort of decision based off of some sort of bigger picture thing, then it's it, it makes the community very, very toxic because it doesn't feel like that they're being heard. Okay. Number nine. So consumer risk is increased because it's possible for the company to errata cards that are too strong in the future. So and this sort of risk is prevalent in other games as well, like Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh, where just cards aren't will like tank in value. So this is more of a like a market watch sort of thing, where cards can depreciate in value just based off of banning. So the best analogy I can make is one that has happened recently, which is a Splinter Twin that got banned in Magic. So it was a very, very popular and prevalent combo in a format called Modern. And basically, what it did was it pissed off a lot of people. Like, people were scared to invest in Modern because just a huge core of the format got banned. And a lot of people bought into the deck thinking that it was a good investment. So it's you got the same sort of thing going on right now, where it's just like, if you're going to errata something, you and something is very, very strong and you like want to invest into some sort of deck, it's very possible that the company might errata the card, making your deck significantly worse, meaning making your cards worth a lot less. So that's just something to consider as well. That's one of the I think one of the worst things about these changes, the whole entire consumer risk. All right, and the final point is if R&R Reflect Refrain continues to dominate, winning the die roll could just be like the difference between a win and a loss. Basically, since combat favors the turn player, right? So you will have more turns all in all if you go first. Basically, you're always like half a turn ahead of your opponent every time you go first. Like, already winning the die roll is something very, very important. I remember in previous videos I said that if you win the die roll, you're already like 70-30% favored. In this format, I feel like you're like kind of 60-40 given like even skill levels, but with this sort of change, I can see this dropping back to 70-30 again, or um, I wouldn't say anything past that, but it's very possible that the outcome of the match can is significantly more dependent on just winning the die roll. And just quickly, I just wanted to talk about just a couple of cards that I think have gotten better and have gotten worse after this errata. I can give a brief description of these. Yeah, I'll go ahead and talk about this. All right, so Change the World gets better. I already talked about this before. Basically, counters are better, or counters are more valuable. Therefore, something like Change the World, which constantly gives counters, is significantly better. And because Change the World is better, Hera is better, Barrier of Shadows is better, and Maribel is better, and Percival is better as well. So basically, cards that get you the Change the World or destroy the Change the World are significantly better because Change the World is better. Uh, let's see, what else is better? Lancelot's better, and with that, Rapid Growth is better. I talked about Lancelot a little bit earlier in terms of Swiftness being better. And because Lancelot's better and Combat is better, Rapid Growth is better. Let's see. Flame King Shout also gets significantly better as well because something like Morgiana just can't dodge Flame King Shout anymore by pumping itself. So like it affects decks like Alice's World. I should have touched on this earlier, but I didn't. But Flame King Shout now is very effective against Alice's World instead of only being able to wipe out maybe one or two guys. Let's see. Cards like Guinevere and Cheshire Cat are significantly better as well because they're cards that increase the consistency of the deck, and it helps shore up the consistency drop with the post reflect errata. Let's see. Rapid Decay becomes very good because I think the Knights deck is going to get very strong in this next format. Let's see. Thunder and Demon Flame get a lot better too because you can bolt on their turn or Demon Flame on their turn, and it wouldn't actually they can't actually pump out of range. Cards like Dark Machina could also get pretty good too. Cards that search up something like Change the World. And let's see, Little Dread also gets pretty better, much better because something like Lancelot gets significantly better, just 6/6s in general. And also Gherta gets better too because of the whole swiftness and target attack. Gherta's a little different because it gets better and it gets worse. So basically, it costs more now, but at the same time, it gets a significant buff because target attack and swiftness are just significantly better. So it's very hard to evaluate whether it actually the card net gains or has a net loss. But I think it's safe to say that like it it has both of these changes. So we'll have to see. All right, so let's look at cards that have gotten worse. So first card I can think of is Fiefsing, the first one, Fiefsing Magus of the Holy Wind. And that's simply because you just can't turbo out a Fiefsing on turn 1.5 with the whole Fiefsing trick being able to untap at the end of the priority phase after end of turn things wear off. If you want a better description of that, you can go to db.tcg dot no, sorry, db.forcibletcg.us, basically the database, and look up Reflect, and it'll explain it there. I believe Shaughnessy Connor has written a little blurb on how the trick works. And with Fiefsing 1.0 being bad, Fiefsing 2.0, which is Fiefsing the Elvish Oracle, becomes bad as well. And simply because you just can't turbo it out on turn 2. And with that, Turbo Arthur isn't a thing anymore, so the White Arthur, being able to turbo that out is significantly worse. You get just more tempoed out if you get it bounced by a Reflect or whatever. And in that same vein, Elvish Priest is significantly worse because you can't do the Fiefsing trick with it anymore. Other losers are, I think, Rasputin and Yogg-Sothoth, and that's just because I think the whole entire deck of Cthulhu's is just significantly more inconsistent. I did cover this in an article earlier on about Cthulhu's. One of its weaknesses is that it's not very consistent. So Reflect now patches up a lot of its weaknesses. But with the change, with the consistency drop, I think that it's dropped to the point where these cards just get worse because the deck is worse overall. You have clunky starts like double Rasputin hands that you can't really get rid of because you have to get rid of other stuff. You have like double Yogg hands, which are also very awkward. You have to have a balance of fodder to activators, and maintaining that balance is really, really important for like the deck being very, very powerful. Although it cheats the mana system, it's one of the strengths of it. Though the weakness is like if you get those sort of hands, it just sucks. It just really does. And so that's why those cards get worse. All right, another card that gets worse is Portal of Truth, and that's because you don't have as many times. So you can't plus. There's a larger opportunity cost now to plus 2ing your opponent's thing and then Portal of Truthing it away, because now you're not just like if you did that pre-nerf, right? You could just plus 2 on their turn and be able to draw on your turn, whereas you're basically giving up a draw for a whole entire turn cycle in order to activate Portal of Truth. So the cost associated to Portal of Truth becomes higher, so therefore the card gets worse. All right, other cards that get worse are Yamada no Orochi and Humpty Dumpty. I covered this a little bit earlier. It's just like the deck is very clunky and pretty inconsistent, and it requires a lot of things to go right. And with this consistency drop, I think that these cards get considerably worse because just the deck in and of itself will function significantly clunkier. All right, and the last card on the cards that have gotten worse list is Morgiana, and that is because you can't draw as many times, so therefore you can't filter as many times with Morgiana's ability, and that means that Morgiana gets worse. You basically cut down on most of its efficiency. All right, so that's basically it. So this change won't be implemented until February 1st, so which is after AGP Pasadena. So it's a little early to tell how many of these things will actually change. I know that Italy has already implemented the Errata change, and there has been a tournament. I've looked at it. It's about I would say a good quarter of it is Reflect. A good quarter of it is also Valentina 2.0, and a good half of it is just whatever. I just keep it. I would say look at their list with a grain of salt because um, I don't know if Italy has a too good of a grasp on the current format. Like these past couple formats that they've had haven't been really reflective of how the format should really be. Like they haven't had a real Knights deck. They haven't had a real Alice's World deck in the mix. I haven't seen any of those in the top list. So it's just something to keep in mind. Um, that being said, though, it's just one tournament, so it's not. I don't know if it's super representative of um, what the next meta is going to look like. But anyways, that being said, a lot of these changes are really good. It just makes for, I think, possibly a healthier format, but at the very least, it makes tournaments so much better. Uh, so with that being said, I think that's enough. I've taken up a lot of your time already, so let's see if we can do this again. All right. Well, anyways, this is Bryan Lue signing out.